Do you ever feel like you have something within you that's holding you back from taking the actions you know you need to take in order to achieve the goals that you're trying to achieve? So many people find that they have these self-sabotaging habits that they can't seem to break out of. Why is this, and what can you do about it? Well, in today's episode of the Exercise is Health podcast, we're going to be diving into this exact topic with life coach Tracy Pleschourt. We're going to cue our introduction and we're going to dive right into this conversation.
If you're not doing these two things with your exercise, you're missing out on the amazing health changes that exercise can bring. And most people are missing these two things. For exercise to be potent for your health, you have to work on frequency and consistency and appropriateness. I want to talk just quickly about appropriateness because almost no one puts this word into fitness. What we've done with the Exercise for Life membership is we've created a teaching style to show you how to exercise and make it appropriate for your body. The two things that people stop exercising for is they're not consistent enough, so they don't see results, or they get injured, so they have to stop, so they don't see results. We are combining the two of them, making it so convenient to exercise at home and to make sure we're teaching you the skills to make sure it's appropriate for your body. So no matter what you have going on with your body, we are on a mission to teach you how to appropriately exercise for your body.
Hey, welcome back, exercisers, to the Exercise is Health podcast, brought to you by Exercise for Life Studios, where we believe that your health is your most valuable asset, and the single best thing that you can do to both boost and protect this asset is exercise, specifically exercise that's geared towards building the health and function of your muscles. We are your hosts, Charlie
and Julie,
and today we are diving into this conversation of what things might be holding us back within our own mind, that we find are self-sabotaging habits that we might be having that are keeping us from doing the things that we know we need to do in order to accomplish the goals that we need to accomplish or that we want to accomplish. We're exploring this topic with life coach Tracy Pleschourt, who is going to discuss this idea of our primitive brain versus our prodigy brain and why we want to be able to tap into our prodigy brain in order to be able to overcome these self-sabotaging habits. Tracy Pleschourt is the founder of The Self-Made You and the host of the Secrets of the Self-Made podcast, helping men and women create self-made wealth and wellness through life coaching. Tracy has mastered and now teaches the critical skills necessary to manage your mind and overcome any obstacle, including overeating, overdrinking, time management, career and relationship changes. Tracy dedicates her work to ambitious, lifelong learners yearning for answers and seeking a better way to create the results they desire and deserve. She instills confidence and a call to action that leads to unlimited wealth and wellness. Well, Tracy, thank you so much for joining us and welcome to our show.
Thanks for having me, Charlie. I'm really excited to be here.
Yeah, I'm very excited about today's discussion because I know really your expertise is helping people reach their goals, solve their problems, and you have a variety of ways that you go about doing that, but you're looking at the psychology of things, you're looking at the physiology of things, you are bringing in a whole slew of your personal experience, your background to help people achieve goals from weight loss to relationships to, breaking through, their professional ceilings and whatnot. And one thing that I really want to focus on with you today is this idea that you talk about of primitive brain versus prodigy brain. So yeah. Can we start by discussing what those two things are? How do you define them?
Yeah. So the neuroscience behind it, I like to say we just teach the basics of neuroscience and explain that you have two parts of your brain. The part that we most often default to using because we don't recognize or understand that there actually is another part that we can use with intention. The part that we default to is what I like to call our primitive brain. And I call it that because when we were in a primitive state, its main mission, its job was to keep us alive. And so it offered us a lot of dramatic, thoughts, fear-based thoughts that had us reacting. And the fact of the matter is we're not in that kind of danger anymore. Mm-hmm. So we've evolved, our environment has evolved, but our brain has not evolved. Mm-hmm. Part of our brain is still in that primitive state. And so when you know that about yourself, when you know that that part of your brain actually has a purpose to keep you safe, you will likely be less judgmental. You'll be likely to not beat yourself up so much over having those thoughts. And here's the big thing, Charlie, you'll be less likely to believe those thoughts. You recognize that it actually has a purpose. It is not like the evil part of your brain. It has a purpose, but you really don't need it in today's, state of affairs. And unfortunately, most of us believe those thoughts and we react from them. So that's the part of the brain that's used by default. The other part of our brain, which scientists would call prefrontal cortex, I like to call it your prodigy brain. It's more of your extraordinary brain. It's the part of your brain that you can actively strengthen, but it takes intention. And I think that first step towards intention is awareness, understanding, acceptance of that primitive brain. So let's just check that box and say, okay, we've talked about that. The prodigy brain is the brain that can question, it can reason. It's a lot more present and it can be methodical. And so we teach our students how to question those primitive brain thoughts that actually are coming from neural pathways. They're very well established, deeply rooted neural pathways that probably came from messaging way back when. But the good news, and what a lot of people don't know, is our brain it has a neuroplasticity to it. And so we can reform those neural pathways. We can replace those by practicing other thoughts. Now, the key to a prodigy brain thought is that it has to be believable. Because if that thought is not believable, then we're kind of dipping our toe into like toxic positivity, right? Those thoughts probably will work against us because we'll start to feel skeptical.
Sure.
We want to feel skeptical. We want to feel something that actually has us moving towards our desired results or towards overcoming whatever problem is at hand.
Okay.
So that's the difference between the two parts of our brain, and really understanding that they both have a purpose.
Sure.
And that there would be something wrong if one of them wasn't doing their job. So therefore, you don't need to beat yourself up over having those primitive brain thoughts. What we want to do is we want to notice them when they're happening, and we want to interrupt what I like to call the mind math, the results that ultimately we will create if all we do is react from primitive brain thoughts.
Okay, cool. I can appreciate this. So as you're talking, like an example is coming to mind that's not like, weight loss or performance or anything like that. But I want to kind of recap what you said to make sure that I'm following you. So, for example, we've all been caught in traffic. And if you have like somewhere that you feel like you need to be, that primitive brain can start jumping in, and you can start you feel your blood pressure rising, you feel yourself, you feel this stress response happening. And then you're talking about this reaction to it where somebody tries to merge into your lane, and all of a sudden, you get pissed off. You're on your horn. And so that's like the primitive brain. And then the prodigy brain comes in, and you can interrupt that and say, okay, well, look, I have 30 minutes to spare. There's plenty of time margin. Traffic is moving. It's a little bit slower. And so you can kind of calm yourself down. But then you talked about this idea of kind of I believe the word was toxic positivity or something, where you're not and I bet in 30 seconds, we're just going to be cruising along. You don't necessarily want to go there. You just want to be realistic about it. Hey, we're moving. I have plenty of time margin. This isn't ideal, but I'm going to be okay. Is that an example that kind of recaps what you're talking about?
Yeah, that's a great example. And maybe you do believe that this is all going to clear up, and in 30 minutes, I'm going to, be at my destination and everything will be fine. And if you believe that, then you're going to feel something. You will feel an emotion that will probably have you responding different. So the difference between what you get from your primitive brain and what you get from your prodigy brain is either a reaction or a response.
Okay.
And if we allow reactions to accumulate, we will create unintentional results. So the mind map that I love to talk about is your primitive brain thoughts create some iteration, some variation of a fear-based emotion. Could be panic, it could be overwhelm, could be frustration, that then has you reacting. And the accumulation, the compound effect of those reactions is what creates your experience or your result.
Sure.
So when you can map it out, when you can see it as just math, this is how, and you have to kind of accept it to be a truth in order to live by it. So this is the way your primitive brain reacts, and you can just accept it as mind math. You don't have to make it mean anything about you. You can simply just look at your result and ask yourself, is this what I want to continue to create for myself? And so then that gives you choice, right? So then you don't feel victim to that guy who just cut you off.
Sure.
Right? You now have a choice. I don't want to feel this way. Okay. Well, then what is it that I do want to be feeling? Or what is it that I also could believe about this circumstance where this guy is cutting me off in traffic?
Sure. Okay. Awesome. And so you brought up this term mind math. Can you go into that a little bit?
Yeah. So it's just an equation. I love, I'm all about evidence-based, so it's more believable. Our primitive and our prodigy brain likes to have evidence. And so I think in an effort to really help people understand, I have this formula where you can put your specific circumstance into this formula and look at how it's playing out. And you can't really argue when you're the person experiencing it and you see how this mind math plays out in black and white. You're like, all right, I'm a believer, because that is truly how my experience is.
Sure.
So that formula is simply, you have a thought about a circumstance. So the circumstance is guy cuts you off in traffic. Right? Now, first things first is the circumstance has to be factual. So if that's just your perspective,
sure,
it has any drama attached to it, it's
right.
a thought. It's not a circumstance. So we could just say traffic, and you might have the thought this isn't fair, I'm going to be late, or that guy shouldn't have cut me off, or he's a horrible driver, right? Those thoughts are making you feel what? So the mind math again is you have a thought about any given circumstance that generates a feeling or an emotion or a vibration that runs through your body. Really important to be able to name it. A lot of us don't have a large vocabulary of feelings. And if you don't, that's a great first step. It's just become more acquainted with the emotions that you do experience. So that might have made you feel frustrated. Now you ask yourself, how do I show up? What's actually happening? What am I doing? What am I not doing when I'm feeling frustrated? And I would encourage you to put pen to paper and see this in black and white, because you can be so much more objective when you can see it. And then you're going to believe it, because again, this is your experience that you're having. You can clearly see why you're spinning out in frustration. You might, slam on your brakes to teach them a lesson. You might honk your horn. You might scream. You might recognize your blood pressure is going up, all while you're really not making any progress. Right? So kind of just circling the drain of frustration. So, and you're really creating an unfair experience for yourself, because you're giving all your power away to traffic, right? And so through putting that in black and white, you can see the math, it gives you a sense of responsibility in the best sort of way, not in a condemning way, but in a control way. I'm not a victim. I actually can feel something totally different. What do I want to choose to believe about this? Or what do I want to feel about this? Maybe I want to feel calm. that's going to trip the trigger of your prodigy brain. And you're going to start asking questions like, it's true that this isn't fair, right? Like, what's not fair about it? Or why is this a problem?
Sure.
But so it really does kind of tripping the trigger of your prodigy brain, like I mentioned at the beginning of this.
Yeah.
It's a much more mindful part of your brain. It's much more reasonable. It uses logic. It can question. And then it affords you this opportunity to respond, not react.
Yeah.
And when you're responding, you can't argue that you're going to get different results. The same exact circumstance, you can have them side by side. And when you can see it in black and white, you can clearly see how through responding, through using your prodigy brain, you are getting a different result. It's just like 1 + 2 = 3.
Yeah.
The same is true. You change a variable, 1 + 3, you've just changed that variable. You've changed your result. And it's just math.
That's really cool. That's a really, really neat process. So let me ask you this. I can see how this, applies to situations where we get triggered in life, from like, say something startles us or angers us or whatnot. How does this fit into the weight loss perspective that you help people with?
Yeah, well, in every sort of way, because you have all sorts of thoughts that are probably deeply rooted that are coming from indirect and direct messaging. And what the mind math does is it reveals those thoughts. And again, it creates a sense of control versus feeling victim, right? I know that I've had messaging that I've been indirectly and directly exposed to since I was yay big. And I often will revert, my primitive brain will grab a hold of those thoughts and offer them up to me at the most inappropriate times. Like, if you don't eat that cookie that's sitting on the counter, it won't be there when you want it, right? So I'm like, I have to have that. And that creates an urge. And that urge has me reacting in such a way that often I overeat, which creates a result for me of being unable to either lose weight or I gain weight.
Sure.
So you can very clearly see how the mind math is playing out, and you don't have to make it mean anything about you. You can just make it mean that is your primitive brain. You're just not managing. I like to call it your self-made mind. When you're managing it, when you understand that there are these two parts, and it really takes intention to trip the trigger of the prodigy part so that you can question that primitive brain thought. Is that true? That I have to eat it right now, that it won't be available to me ever again?
Sure.
Oh, that's not true. And when you reason with yourself, you can't help, organically, you will feel different because you're operating from a different belief.
No, that totally makes sense. That's awesome. So, so when you work with clients, is it a process of helping them go through these mind math cycles faster or easier? Like, what does that look like?
Yeah, so that's such a good question, Charlie. It's more about heightening their awareness around, how their brain works first and foremost, and then equipping them with this tool, the mind math tool, so that they can see it play out over and over and over. I teach my clients to literally think in a mind math formula sort of way, and they start to live their life from that, because technically, when you really see the evidence, when you see that every experience in your life, every result is you are responsible for that, now you start to deduct from that, holy crap, I could put anything I want in that equals line and work my way backwards.
Oh, cool. Yeah.
And now I can create things that weren't ever even on my radar. And so, yes, to answer your question, yes, we teach the neuroscience, and then we teach how to use the mind math. We teach this basics, science of math, and then it does go into practicing, practicing and strengthening that prodigy brain. Now, there are so many different concepts that we like to teach as needed. But I will tell you for sure, this tool changes lives. And you don't have to know all of the neuroscience,
Sure.
all of the cognitive science behind, the whys. You can just start to practice this sense of responsibility that you get when you are equipped, when you know better, and that changes everything.
So what kind of challenges do you find people facing when they're trying to implement this and when they're trying to strengthen their prodigy brain? Like, what are some roadblocks or hurdles that your clients have come across in the past?
Oh, Charlie, you ask like the best questions. All right. So here's problem number one, is that they think that their thought is actually the circumstance. They believe so wholeheartedly what they are thinking. They think that it is the truth. And so they would argue that, no, that's the circumstance. Like,
okay,
my husband doesn't love me anymore. That's the circumstance. When the circumstance is actually just your husband, and the thought you're having is he doesn't love me anymore.
Gotcha.
So it's an exercise in separating fact from story. Okay. So I would say that's the biggest hurdle.
I could see that being challenging for, many people. Yeah.
Yep. And so I would say, first off, getting into that habit of finding your thoughts and your feelings. So I recommend sitting down, carving out like 2 minutes a day and just doing a brain dump of what's on your mind. What are you thinking? What are you feeling? And I know a lot of people are like, I can't find my thoughts. I don't know where to start. Start with what you're feeling. Just start writing down your emotions. Find an emotion that you actually is kind of unwanted and ask yourself why you're feeling that. The answer is the thought. That's the thought that you can plug into your primitive brain mind math. And now you're on your way.
I love it. I love it. That's very important and it's super applicable. Just getting people to just pause for a second, identify what's going through their mind, try to articulate it in a way that makes sense to them.
Yes.
And then they're like, okay, cool. Now that it's out there, now I can do something about it.
Right. That's so key. Like it has to make sense to them because we've all been in, formal institutions where we're trying to learn something.
Sure.
But yet we're trying to interpret somebody else's often experience and through their language. I want you to have this applied learning experience. And that's why we put your thought, not my thought, we put your thought, we put that feeling that you're experiencing. You decide how you're showing up and what the result is. And here's the kicker. You get to decide whether that's a problem or not. I'm not insinuating that feeling frustrated is even a problem.
Sure.
You can look at your results line in that math equation and you get to decide. So it really does put all of the responsibility, it gives you back the control. When you feel that way, when you believe that, it, like I said, it changes everything. And I think if more people in the world thought like this, we wouldn't have so much blame going on right now. And so, I really do think it comes down to this simple science and math and really understanding it through your lens.
I love it. I love it. So let me just recap the equation one more time. So it's first, you're going to identify the objective circumstance. Okay.
Yes.
So like what is happening objectively. All right. Then you're going to identify your thought about that circumstance. Okay. What are your thoughts? What do what are you thinking? And then step 3 is you identify how those thoughts are making you feel. What's the feeling that's associated with it?
Exactly.
And then you go into, that's when you go into your reaction response, like what are you doing now? And then what's the result that's getting you? And then you can figure out which of those variables, the circumstance is going to be the same, but you can figure out your thought, if you want to change your thought, the feeling, or how you are reacting or responding to it. And then that's what's going to get you the different outcome or result.
Exactly. That's
awesome.
Exactly it. Yep.
I love it. That's fantastic. So when you start working with people, is it like try doing this all the time? Or is it like, hey, you know what? Try, see if like once during the day when you see something come up, start to implement this. Like, how would people go about implementing this into their daily life?
Yeah. So I have some clients who are visual learners. They learn very well through frameworks. That's how I am. And so that's why I've chosen to teach in the style that I do. I recognize that not everybody is like that. So when I'm coaching somebody, I can quite quickly understand whether they are a framework person or they really would prefer to just kind of sit back and understand a concept better versus visually see it. So the mind math works regardless. I don't have to have this visual, in front of them at all times. I can just simply ask them, how are you feeling? And why is that? And so to answer your question, anytime I have white space on my calendar, if I in the morning am like really wanting to actively achieve something, I know that that's going to take me tripping the trigger of my Prodigy Brain. I'm probably not going to have as an efficient process of getting what it is that I most want if I just leave it to chance or allow my primitive brain to run the show.
Yeah.
So I know I have to do something that keeps my Prodigy Brain engaged. And a great way to do that is to just set an alarm on your phone. If you can see in the morning that you've got white space between 12 and 1, and then you've got white space again between 3 and 4, I set an alarm. And then I simply ask the question, how am I feeling? And why am I feeling that way? Now I've got like fodder to do some simple mind math. And oh, by the way, I'm strengthening my Prodigy Brain. It's self-command that I am no longer living in unintentioned default autopilot world.
Sure.
I am in control.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. Awesome. Tracy, where can people find out more about you and your work? How can they connect with you?
Yeah, the best place is at our website, www.self-made, and then it's the letter U.com. We have the mind math formula that you can download for free with the instructions of how to use it. And I would recommend go there, download a bunch of them, have those in front of you, start to practice taking that control back by understanding how your primitive brain is running. It's just not being managed, and that's okay. You can learn to manage through tripping the trigger of your Prodigy Brain.
Absolutely. That's such a useful thing. So I'll be sure to put that in the show notes in the bottom of this interview. The question that we like wrapping up with for all of our guests is, Tracy, what is your definition of health?
Ooh, of health? It's very comprehensive. I would say it's comprehensive of mental, emotional, physical, and I'm going to underscore the metabolic part.
Awesome. I love it. Well, Tracy, thank you so much for joining us. This was such a fascinating interview, and it's super applicable as well. I mean, just having that mind math formula, identify the circumstance, identify your thoughts about it, identify how you're feeling about it, look at how you are responding or reacting to it, figure out which one of those variables you want to change to get the result that you want. I love it. Thank you so much for joining us.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
So who do you know that needs to hear this episode? Who do you know that feels like they are getting in their own way of accomplishing the goals that they want to accomplish? Share this episode with them so they can learn about these simple steps that Tracy recommends to help them get past their primitive brain and move into tapping into their Prodigy Brain. And while you're online, head on over to Apple Podcasts and leave us a rating and review. It helps people find our podcast when they're looking for information on exercise and when they're looking for information on health. So if you found value in this conversation today, let us know by leaving us that 5-star rating and review. Well, thanks so much for tuning in. We always appreciate it. Have a fantastic week, and we'll talk with you all next week.